My name is Dana Calloway. I'm 41 years old. And on a Tuesday morning in March, I walked back into the building where I had worked for 10 years, through the same glass doors I had badged through 4,000 times, past the same security desk where Marcus always had my coffee order ready. Except this time, I wasn't wearing my employee badge. I was carrying a folder with my name on the deed. The building was mine. Marcus looked up from the security desk. He stared at the folder. He stared at me. And then he did something he had never done in 10 years of me walking through those doors. He stood up. "Miss Calloway," he said, "welcome back." 7 days earlier, my boss, Richard Payne, had called me into his office, slid a printed expense report across his desk, pointed to a single highlighted line, $15.40, a lunch receipt from March 3rd, and told me I was terminated, effective immediately, for expense fraud. 10 years, one receipt, $15. Before I tell you everything, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly speaks to you. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. Not the termination, not the deed, but the moment I should have seen all of it coming. A holiday party 7 years ago, where I watched Richard Payne take credit for something I had spent 4 months building from scratch. I am not someone who grew up with safety nets. My mother, Carol Calloway, cleaned office buildings in Cincinnati, Ohio for 26 years, night shift mostly. She'd come home at 6 a.m., smelling like industrial cleaner and floor wax, make breakfast, sleep for 4 hours, and then get up to help me with homework. She never complained. She never called in sick. She never asked anyone for anything. My father left when I was 9. No dramatic exit. He just stopped coming home. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. My mother never talked about it. She just adjusted and added another shift on weekends. Bought store-brand everything, made sure I had what I needed for school. I put myself through the University of Cincinnati on loans and a part-time job at a hotel front desk. Accounting degree. Graduated with honors. Nobody was in the audience because my mother was working. I framed my diploma myself and hung it on the wall of my apartment above a desk I'd bought secondhand from a garage sale on Kenwood Road. I was 23 years old, and I was ready to build something. I joined Payne Capital Management as a junior financial analyst in 2014. They were a mid-size commercial real estate investment firm based in downtown Cincinnati, 40 employees, a portfolio of 12 commercial properties across Ohio and Kentucky, a managing partner named Gerald Payne, who was sharp and fair, and a director of operations named Richard Payne, Gerald's son, who was neither of those things. Richard had the office, the title, and the last name. He did not have his father's instincts. He managed through intimidation and credit-taking. He'd arrive late to meetings where you'd been presenting for 20 minutes, let you finish, then summarize your conclusions as though they'd occurred to him independently. I learned his patterns quickly. I also learned to document everything. My first 3 years at Payne Capital Management were quiet. I kept my head down, delivered excellent work, and slowly built a reputation among the analysts and associates as someone who could be trusted with complicated problems. Gerald Payne noticed. He started pulling me into senior meetings, asking my opinion on acquisition targets, copying me on correspondence that, at my level, I had no reason to receive. Richard noticed, too. That's when the dynamics shifted. The holiday party was in December 2017. I had spent 4 months developing a financial model for a potential portfolio expansion into Kentucky commercial real estate, a project Gerald had assigned me directly, bypassing Richard entirely. The model was detailed, original, and represented the most sophisticated analysis the firm had done in years. Gerald presented it at the party to the senior investors as the year's marquee achievement. Richard stood beside him, nodding, accepting handshakes, saying things like, "We've been working on this for months," and "the team really delivered on this one." Gerald glanced at me once across the room, a small, specific look. He knew. He saw Richard doing what Richard always did. But Gerald said nothing. He was 67 years old, and Richard was his son, and some things fathers cannot bring themselves to do. I went home that night and sat at my second-hand desk and thought about my mother scrubbing floors at 3 a.m. I thought about safety nets. I thought about what it meant to build something that someone else could take. And I started making a plan. The plan took 7 years. Not because I'm patient by nature, I'm not, but because the thing I was building required time, capital, and the right moment, and all 3 of those things move on their own schedule. Let me explain what I was doing on the surface first. On the surface, I was being an excellent employee. I was promoted to senior analyst in 2018, financial manager in 2020, and director of financial strategy in 2022. Each promotion came with a raise. Each raise went into 2 places, my investment account and my education. I got my CPA license in 2019, my MBA part-time at night in 2021. I took every certification course, every real estate finance seminar, every commercial property valuation class I could find. Not because Payne Capital asked me to, because I was building something. What I was actually building was knowledge, the specific, layered, technical knowledge of exactly how commercial real estate investment firms work and exactly what they're worth. I also built relationships, not networking in the artificial sense, real relationships, built over time with the people who actually make things happen in this industry: attorneys, lenders, developers, appraisers, people who knew me as Dana Calloway, not as Richard Payne's employee. One of those relationships was a woman named Sylvia Chen. Sylvia was a commercial real estate attorney I'd met at a conference in Columbus in 2019. We'd ended up at the same table at dinner, started talking about valuation methodology, and talked until the restaurant closed. She was brilliant, direct, and the kind of person who said exactly what she meant. We stayed in touch, grabbed coffee when she was in Cincinnati, called each other when we had questions neither of us wanted to ask inside our respective offices. In 2022, I told Sylvia what I was thinking about. She didn't laugh. She asked 3 questions, listened to my answers, and said, "You'd need an anchor investor, someone with capital who doesn't need Payne's approval to move." "I know someone," I said. The someone was Howard Ellis.
Howard had been Gerald Payne's original business partner in the early days of Payne Capital, a fact that had been quietly buried over the years as Richard consolidated power and marginalized anyone connected to the old guard. Howard had sold his stake back to Gerald in 2011 and moved to real estate development in Kentucky. We'd met twice at firm events when I was a junior. He'd been kind to me in the specific way that people who are used to being overlooked recognize each other. In 2023, I called Howard directly, explained what I knew, explained what I'd been building, explained what I believed was possible. He was quiet for a long time. "You've got the analysis to back this up?" he asked. 7 years of it, I said. "Send me what you have." I sent him 43 pages. He called back in 4 days. "When do we start?" he said. Now, let me tell you about the $15 lunch. I need you to understand something first. I did nothing wrong. Not technically, not ethically, not even procedurally. On March 3rd, I had a working lunch with 2 junior analysts on my team, Maya and Corey, to review Q1 projections. We went to a sandwich place 2 blocks from the office. I paid. I submitted the receipt under business meals, as I had done hundreds of times, literally in 10 years. The receipt was $15.40. 3 weeks later, Richard called me into his office at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. He was sitting behind his desk with a printed expense report and a specific expression, the one he wore when he decided something before you walked in and just needed you present to make it official. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. He slid the printed report across the desk. One line was highlighted in yellow. March 3rd, business meal, $15.40. "This receipt," he said, "lists 3 people, you, Maya, and Corey, but the meal was submitted under a client entertainment category. You had no client present." I kept my face neutral. "It was a working lunch with my direct reports," I said. "I've submitted team meals under business expenses for 8 years. It's always been approved." Policy changed in January. Team meals require pre-approval from your department head. "You're my department head," I said. "You never communicated a policy change." He folded his hands on the desk. This was the part where the decision revealed itself. "Dana, I've had concerns about your expense submissions for some time. This is part of a pattern." A pattern? 10 years, 1 receipt, $15. "What pattern?" I asked. He opened a second folder, a series of highlighted lines, small amounts, all correctly submitted, all previously approved. A client dinner from 2022, a conference registration from 2021, a mileage reimbursement from 2023. Each one presented as evidence of a habit strung together by implication rather than fact. I understood what was happening. This wasn't about the $15. Howard and I had been 90 days from closing. Richard's move accelerated our timeline, which, honestly, was the thing he never anticipated. That removing me from Payne Capital didn't weaken my position. It freed me from the one constraint that had been slowing us down. I no longer had to be careful about conflicts of interest. Sylvia had been structuring the acquisition for 3 months. The target was the building at 1140 Commerce Drive, the building that housed Payne Capital Management's offices, the building that Richard Payne walked into every morning believing he owned the world. He didn't own it. A real estate investment trust called Meridian Holdings did, and Meridian, as I had known from years of managing Payne Capital's portfolio analysis, had been trying to quietly exit its Ohio commercial holdings since 2021. Carrying costs, aging infrastructure, and a management company that wasn't performing. I had put together a purchase proposal 6 months earlier. Howard provided the anchor capital. 3 additional investors Sylvia had cultivated, 2 from Kentucky, 1 from Indianapolis, came in for the remainder. The financing was structured through a commercial lender in Columbus who'd worked with Howard for 15 years. The day Richard fired me, we were waiting on one final title clearance. It came through on Thursday. Sylvia called me at 7:14 p.m. "We're clear," she said. "Close it." We closed on Friday afternoon. I signed my name on the ownership documents at a conference table in Sylvia's office in Columbus. Howard was there. The 2 Kentucky investors joined by video call. The Columbus lender shook my hand across the table. The building at 1140 Commerce Drive was now owned by CRC Property Holdings, LLC. CRC stood for Carol, Ruth, Calloway. My mother's name, my grandmother's name, my name. I drove home, made dinner, called my mother.
"Mom," I said, "I need to tell you something." She listened, quiet the whole way through. When she finished, she said, "Your grandmother would have laughed until she cried." I thought about that all night.
Monday morning, 7 days after the termination. I dressed carefully. Dark blazer, good shoes, the specific kind of outfit that says, I belong in this building. Because I do. Technically and legally, and in every way that matters. Sylvia met me in the parking lot. She was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression she'd reserved for moments she'd been preparing for a long time. Howard was already inside, in the lobby, talking to Marcus at the security desk. Marcus, who had been at that desk for 8 years, who knew every employee by name and coffee order, who had handed me a badge every single morning for a decade. When I walked through those glass doors, Howard stepped aside. Marcus looked at me, looked at Sylvia, looked at the folder I was carrying. "Miss Calloway," he said, very carefully. "Welcome back," I smiled. "Thank you, Marcus. Is Richard in yet?" "He arrived about 20 minutes ago." "Perfect." We rode the elevator to the 4th floor, Richard's floor, the executive suite, with its corner office and its view of the river and its framed company logo on the wall that Richard had redesigned 3 years ago to remove his father's original branding. His assistant, a young woman named Bree, looked up from her desk when we stepped off the elevator. "Miss Calloway, is he in?" "He's in a meeting, but tell him Dana Calloway is here, and tell him he should take this one." Bree picked up her phone, spoke quietly. There was a pause. The office door opened. Howard stood in the frame in his Monday morning suit, glasses reading pushed up on his head, an expression of supreme confidence that was already beginning to fracture at the edges. "Dana," he said. The confidence is trying to hold. "This is unexpected." "I imagine so," I said. "Richard, this is Sylvia Chen, our legal counsel. I believe you should sit down." The meeting took 40 minutes. I'll give you the summary the way Sylvia gave it to Richard. Clean, sequential, factual. CRC Property Holdings, LLC had completed the purchase of 1140 Commerce Drive on Friday. We were the new landlords. Payne Capital Management's lease, which Richard had allowed to lapse into a month-to-month arrangement 18 months earlier, without renewing, a detail I had flagged in a memo to Gerald that Richard had overridden, was now subject to renegotiation. The new lease terms were not punitive. I want to be clear about that. I am not in the business of cruelty. The new terms were market rate, which happened to be 23% higher than what Payne Capital was currently paying. Standard, justifiable, the going rate for commercial space in that corridor. Richard had 60 days to sign the new lease or vacate. Sylvia slid the documents across the desk. Richard looked at the ownership line, CRC Property Holdings, LLC, looked at me. "This is," he started. "Legal," Sylvia said. "Completely and entirely legal." He looked at the lease terms, looked at the timeline, looked at his own office around him as though seeing it for the first time. "You planned this," he said. "I planned a great many things, including my career. That's something we actually had in common, Richard. We were both always planning. You just stopped paying attention to what I was planning." He had no answer for that. I stood, smoothed my jacket. This was becoming a habit. "You have the documents. Sylvia's number is on the last page. Please have your attorney contact her by the end of the week." I picked up my bag, walked to the door. I stopped, turned back. Old instinct. "One more thing," I said. He looked up. "That $15 receipt was for a working lunch with Maya and Corey. They're excellent analysts. Whatever happens with your lease negotiation, take care of your people. The good ones don't stay when they're not valued." I walked out. Sylvia caught up with me in the hallway. She was almost smiling, which for Sylvia was the equivalent of a standing ovation.
"Your last part wasn't in the plan," she said. "No," I said, "but it needed to be said." Here's what happened after. Richard signed the new lease, 44 days into his 60-day window. I know because Sylvia called me when it came through, and I was in Columbus at a Crescentian board meeting when it happened. He paid the market rate. He had no leverage not to. Howard and I expanded CRC's portfolio within 14 months, 2 additional properties in Cincinnati, 1 in Louisville. We brought in a property management firm to handle day-to-day operations. Within 18 months, the portfolio was generating returns that made Howard's initial investment look conservative. Gerald Payne called me once, 8 months after the termination. His voice was old, careful. "I heard what happened," he said. "I heard all of it." "I know," I said. "I should have done something years ago." A long pause. "You know that, don't you?" "I know," I said again. "I'm proud of what you built. Your mother raised someone remarkable." He didn't mention Richard. I didn't ask. Maya and Corey, the 2 analysts at my ill-fated $15 lunch, both left Payne Capital within 8 months of my termination. Maya came to work for CRC as our director of financial analysis. Corey started his own firm. I wrote him a reference letter that I hope he still has. My mother came to see the building in June. We stood on the sidewalk outside 1140 Commerce Drive on a sunny Tuesday morning. She looked up at the glass facade, the revolving doors, the Payne Capital logo visible through the lobby windows. "You own this?" she said. "We own this," I said. She looked at me. Her hands were rough from 26 years of cleaning buildings, not that different from this one. "CRC," she said quietly. "Carol, Ruth, Calloway," I said. "All 3 of us." She didn't cry. My mother never cries. She just stood there on the sidewalk looking up at that building with an expression I had never seen on her face before, and haven't been able to fully describe since. Pride. Not for the building, for the woman who built it. We went and had lunch. A good lunch. Somewhere nice. I kept the receipt. I want to ask you something before you go. Because I've thought about this often since everything happened. Richard fired me for over $15, whether it was genuine policy enforcement or a calculated move to remove a threat he sensed but couldn't identify. The result was the same. He made a decision that he believed was final. And here's my honest question. Do you think he would have made a different decision if he'd known who he was really firing? Or do you think that's exactly the point, that people like Richard never see the people they underestimate clearly enough to be afraid of them? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had power over you and then outgrown them so completely that the power equation flipped entirely, tell me that story. Because those stories matter. Every single one of them. Subscribe, because next week I'm sharing what happened when Richard's new lease came up for renewal and the condition I attached to it.